Would he agree that his comments are really focused on what's presented in the bill rather than what is also the parallel aim of the negotiations with the trade unions, and that the fundamental aim there of increasing the minimum statutory amount to the less well-paid civil servants is actually critical, fair, and would he support it?
Well, I stand up the point the honourable member makes, but can I make this point in return? If the February 2010 deal was unacceptable to one trade union within the negotiations, then it strikes me as being logical that that deal would have to be significantly improved upon in order to make that deal acceptable for the PCS trade union. I don't get any impression from the Minister that there's going to be any significant moves forward to improve that deal financially, which leads me to the conclusion that those negotiations might not be as fruitful as the members on the benches opposite hope for. I'll give you again.
Would the honourable members support the concept of making the proposal to the trade unions more attractive for the lower paid, even if less attractive for the better paid?
Well, the penultimate, or one of the last points I will make in my contribution is I believe that the February 2010 deal should be put back on the table. That's the simple fact of it. And I believe that that represents the best opportunity, as the Shadow Minister said, the best opportunity for a deal to be reached. But can I make this point? I understood also when the Minister said that they were proposing a 15-month deal for those who volunteered for redundancy. I can understand from a negotiating point of view, again, why that might seem attractive. But I don't think it's attractive for the many low-paid civil servants who work in my constituency, because it won't be seen as attractive because they'll see it as a pearl-handed revolver to the temple, which says you take 12 months if it's compulsory, but we'll give you 15 months to go quietly. And I don't think that's fair for civil servants. And there's an example I used when I made the intervention in the Minister earlier on in the debate, and it's this. Take a 42-year-old civil servant. I choose that because it's nearly close to my age. A 42-year-old civil servant with 20 years' service. The pre-February deal, or the deal which is currently in place because the legislation hasn't changed because of the legal action, that individual would have been paid £60,000. Under the February 2010 proposals put forward by the Labour Government, that individual would have received £58,000. And under the terms of this bill, that individual would receive £20,000 in compulsory terms, or £25,000 if they go voluntarily. Yes.
Just for a matter of clarity, I respect the gentleman's argument. I was just trying to understand. He talked about a 42-year-old who'd worked for 28 years. That suggests he started work, or she, 14. I would have a bit more understanding if you could perhaps use an example that was more realistic.
I forgive my accent, you probably didn't catch it. I said 20 years service. So maybe that clears it up. It was a 42-year-old civil servant who's worked for 20 years. Okay? Is that okay? Numbers are okay. Okay, so the point I was going to make is that forgive me, I wasn't trying to suggest that we'd introduce some sort of new legislation in Scotland where people started work earlier. But that's not the case. But the point I'm making is the lowest paid are still paying the biggest price. That's unfair, and I hope the people on the benches opposite would take that on board. I also think that I've heard a number of times in a number of interventions and debate is people who are saying is the private sector don't get this, particularly the honourable gentleman across in the benches opposite. The reality is that I was a full-time negotiator for the Public Commercial Service Union and its predecessors for many years, and let me tell you what happened in the public sector. When times were good, and you went into negotiation and you asked in Oliver style for more, the answer you got back was that we had to set an example. And therefore we couldn't share in the country's wealth at that time because we had to set an example. And then when the times are bad, then the argument changed from opposite the side of the table, because the answer became, we can't afford it. And therefore, that's why the civil service has been a battleground for a number of years. I remember, sadly I'm old enough to remember the 1980-1981 pay disputes. I remember that we get new pay arrangements in place by the Prime Minister at the time was Margaret Thatcher, put new arrangements in place in the late 1980s. And those were ripped up. If you remember, in September 1992, we had the disastrous ERM mechanism, which we had to pull out of. In September 1992. In 1993, the Conservative government imposed a 1.5% pay limit in the whole of the public sector in order to take account of the economic problems they had at that time. And I'll mention those points to demonstrate the link between Conservative governments and cuts to the civil service, but also make the point to demonstrate that the civil service are always the easy example. We always have this dilemma between the public sector and the private sector, is that we were trying to emulate in some way the private sector's efficiency. And there's an eternal debate that goes on about how we make the public sector more efficient. The conundrum is this, is that in the private sector you can make a profit, and in the public sector it's about service and delivery. The public sector must always be efficient, but the price that public servants are prepared to pay for lower salaries and doing their bit to be efficient, as many members have already said in this debate, is that prepared to accept low salaries in return for better terms and conditions of service. And that's a simple fact of the matter. Yes, I will.
Thank you very much. The member for West Suffolk earlier highlighted the fact that, I think it was West Suffolk, highlighted the fact that actually there is little difference between the weekly private and public sector salaries. How do you equate that with your argument that there's been this differential growing time after time?
Well, the simple fact of the matter is that I can't pluck any statistic out there that will disprove that. Let me tell you, when I was a negotiator, I used the Retail Prices Index, I used RPIX, I used CPI, I used whichever argument backed up my claims to do the best for my members. That's the simple fact of the matter. And therefore, the honourable member, I respect the fact that he's using figures that he got from the library. I don't doubt those figures at all, but I can also demonstrate that there will be other figures which will support my argument, and my figures are more accurate than his. Yes.
Can I ask my honourable friend about the figure that was quoted from across the House? My understanding was it was a figure from 2009, with no other years quoted, and I'm sure my honourable friend will agree that 2009 was in the midst of the deepest recession since the 1930s, and at that stage the private sector had taken the real hit, and perhaps that explains what I think a statistician would describe as an outlier figure, because most statisticians and statistics would suggest that the private sector there is a pay premium, and that's been established over 30 or 40 years. So to quote just 2009, I think, is a little naughty.
I will defer to the honourable member's greater knowledge in these matters, and I'll get back to the point that I was trying to make. They take poorer salaries in return for more reasonable terms and conditions, and that's because when things go pear-shaped, they expect to get reasonable protection. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, things have went pear-shaped without any shadow of doubt, but the problem is that the safety net that they thought was there is going to be withdrawn. But ministers can still do the right thing, and I hope they do take heed of my contribution and other contributions we made from other members. But the Right Honourable Member for Horsham, in order to demonstrate his desire for fairness, said in at the Public Administration Select Committee that our view was that had the scheme that was introduced by the last government, which was diluted as negotiations went on, I understand, in order to secure the agreement of all the unions, including PCS, remained in place, then there would have been a very pressing case made for us to retain that and work with that. And I think that's a position that the Honourable Member, Right Honourable Member for Horsham, should continue to take away. He should drop this bill, and we should move back to the February 2010 negotiations as a basis for the negotiations, and hopefully as a basis in which negotiations can be concluded. But what worried me is in that same debate, this is what the Minister said. He said the truth is that there are significant numbers of people within the civil service for whom, through no fault of their own, but simply because of the way of life has moved on, there is no job in reality, but who are not made redundant because the terms are prohibitively expensive at the moment. With the greatest respect, that's arrant nonsense. I have visited government departments, agencies and NDPBs up and down the length and breadth of this country, and I have never seen highly paid workers sitting around doing nothing. So I don't believe that's accurate, and I would hope the Minister would withdraw that comment, because what you should know is that 40% of civil servants earn £20,000 or less, that 4/5 of civil servants earn less than £30,000, and the Right Honourable Member for Horsham, for the Right Honourable Member for Horsham to tell us in which departments these people are sitting around doing nothing and earning money. Now, Mr Speaker, there is another stumbling block which we cannot hide from in this debate, and that's the trade union position. And I think it's important that that's covered as well. It's a fact that 5 out of the 6 trade unions backed the February 2010 deal. It's a fact that PCS rejected the deal. And it's a fact that the Public Administration Select Committee, the PCS said that half of their 300,000 members would lose out because of the February 2010 deal. Those were their higher earning members, and I fully understand their concerns. But then I look at the other trade unions who were involved in those negotiations, the FDA and Prospect, for example. The FDA represent the most senior civil servants in the United Kingdom, and Prospect has been as a union which predecessor unions have represented professionals, managers and scientists, again more highly paid. Both of those trade unions accepted that they had to make some compromises in the negotiations that took place with the last Labour government. And the realities of life are that they probably reached the conclusion, before even the words were said by members on the benches opposite, that we're all in this together, that the public sector also had to make a contribution to the rebalancing of the economy. The PCS rejected the deal, they took legal action and they stopped the deal. But they didn't just stop the deal for their own trade union and their own members. They stopped the deal for all of the trade unions that are part of the Council of Civil Service Trade Unions. And now, this bill tells us that all bets are off. The Right Honourable Member for Horsham states that had the deal been accepted, they would have probably honoured it, but then offers, on the other hand, a significantly poorer deal, which is linked to future negotiations. The Minister may feel that there's an opportunity to save more money. The Minister may feel that it's an opportunity to humiliate PCS for what he might perceive to be their exceptionally foolish action. Yes, I will.